here I was with a master's degree in nutrition, very educated in health specifically, and I had no clue what was happening in my body. So many other women I was working with or that I knew personally or professionally were also struggling with these same things. That just showed that there was a huge gap in support and a lack of understanding, quite honestly, with women's health. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of She's in Sync. Today is a special episode because I am celebrating a little over 1.5 years in business. So, for those of you who don't know, I opened Nourished by Taylor. I officially left my full time job. I was a manager at an eating disorder facility here in Columbus, Ohio, and I thought that was my dream job. I thought I was going to be there for my entire life. And honestly, if I didn't have my own personal experience, my negative experience coming off of birth control, and my eyes being open to how much is wrong with the lack of information and lack of support in the women's health space, I probably would still be there. But I want to take you a little bit behind the scenes of why I left that career and made the bold and scary decision to open my own business, specializing in helping women have a proactive approach to stopping birth control and getting to the root cause of things like acne, painful or missing periods, anxiety, PMS, mood swings, etc., versus what most women are told is just take birth control or just stop and see what happens, or that's just a part of being a woman, that's normal. So, going back even further, I have an episode on this. For those of you who haven't listened to it, I think it's actually my first episode that I've ever done. And I went into the field of eating disorders. I knew that's what I wanted to do because of my own struggles with disordered eating in high school and college. I originally was put on birth control at 18 years old because I lost my period. And I was your textbook super healthy, worked out, ate lots of vegetables, drank a lot of water. I did all the healthy girl things, but it was to the extreme. And it was actually a disordered relationship with food, exercise, and my weight. I would weigh myself every single day. I would count calories. I would put a lot of pressure on myself to exercise a certain amount of time or a certain amount each week when I'm on vacation, etc. And I had a lot of stress around what I put in my mouth. And it translated into I thought about food all the time and I thought about exercise all the time. And it caused a lot of anxiety. And those of you who know about eating disorders, it's not just about the food, it's not just about your body, it's a form of control. And I didn't realize that at the time, but I did realize through my career becoming a dietitian, or rather my schooling to start my career as a dietitian, that it was not healthy. And an interesting fact is a lot of dietitians actually go into the field and they might develop some disordered eating because of what we were taught of, good food, bad food, diet culture mentality. Not all of dietetics is like that. Like, I want to be clear that especially nowadays, there's much more awareness around disordered eating and everything in moderation approach, etc. But it's still, I mean, you're talking about food and what to eat and all that, and that can play into a disordered eating, especially those of us who go into the dietetics schooling. We are more type A typically, and we are more over controlled. And that is a lot of times, the type of people or the type of personality that gets wrapped up into being controlled by an eating disorder. And then, of course, you layer in the pressure to look a certain way or to be healthy or, just all the messages we get from various avenues. And that can really take a toll. So I lost my period and was secretly struggling with an eating disorder, decided to, really work on my health and was able to recover from that disordered eating on my own. I did not get professional treatment. I think that would have helped expedite things and would have been very supportive for me. But I was able to, slowly but surely weight restore and, recognize that it's okay to have dessert. It's okay to take rest days, prolong time off from exercising, and really improve my relationship with food, exercise, and my body. And I felt so like free once I recovered from that disordered eating. And I'm saying disordered eating because I was never formally diagnosed with an eating disorder, but if I got professional treatment, I probably could have been. It probably would have been OSFED, like other specified feeding and eating disorders, something that doesn't fit into a unique or a very specific category. But it was more of like an orthorexia situation of like me going into it to be the healthiest I could be, but that veered too far. So I wanted to, with this newfound freedom and recognizing, okay, like I want to help other people not feel this way. Like I see first and foremost how much an eating disorder and disordered eating can wreck your life. And I want to help other women and men not have to go through what I went through. So when I went through school and by the time I got to grad school and my dietetic internship, I knew I wanted to go into eating disorders. And I felt, I mean, I still am. I'm very grateful that I knew what I wanted to do. And that stuck. I had a rotation. I had a week at an eating disorder facility, which was not a lot of time, but I was able to see what it was like to be an eating disorder dietitian. And I knew going into that, I was like, that'll either confirm or deny that this is the right role for me because eating disorders, again, it's not just about the food, it's mental health. There's lots of other diagnoses tying into that anxiety, depression, lots of things that go into it, trauma. And so I had that rotation. I was like, yep, I love this. This is what I want to do. This is my calling. And after a period of time, was able to, I worked in a hospital setting for a while, not doing eating disorders right when I graduated from grad school, my internship, and became officially a dietitian. But I was able to find a job here in Columbus that I'd actually gone to a continuing education event there. And I saw this opening, and it was like divine timing because was in that post graduation era of like trying to find a job and not really doing what I wanted to do and being stuck in, the place I went to grad school. And it was a very, college town slash families. And I was like in that in between of like young professional age. So I was also single and, there wasn't a lot of dating opportunities. And it was just a weird time of my life. And so when I saw this job, I was like, oh my gosh, like this would be amazing. At the time, I was like, Columbus is a big city. And I was excited at the prospect of moving there. And so I had the phone interview, it went really well. And then I got a second interview where I actually went down to Columbus and talked with the lead dietitian. It went really well. And I was hired along with one of my now best friends. We were hired around the exact same time. They liked us both so much, they hired us both instead of just one of us. And it was an amazing job. I mean, it was rough. I learned so much, but I worked with the most amazing team. And I'm forever grateful at the experience that it provided me. And I grew so much personally and professionally at that job. And I thought when I got that, that would be where I would stay forever, like for my entire career. I remember I even naively said that when I was being introduced to the outpatient therapist. I was like, this is my dream job. Like, I'm going to be here forever. Something like cheesy like that. And they're probably like, okay, this girl is like new and fresh and, we'll see how long she lasts. But I lasted there a long time. I was very passionate about the work and I was doing meaningful work. And I, poured my heart into that. And it, like I said, it's a rough position. You get lashed out. I mean, you work with amazing people and you're working with mental health disorders. And a lot of times there's so much going on with that. And so as a dietitian, you're telling them the exact opposite of what they want to hear. You're kind of the bad guy in that scenario of like, this is what you need to eat. We need to do this. And that can be really challenging for people. So again, it made me grow really well and it really helped with my communication skills. And, I really did pour my heart into that position. So eventually, after 6 years of working as a dietitian in multiple different levels of care, I worked in outpatient, IOP, and then I helped cover for partial hospitalization now and then. I got promoted to the management position. It was the first management position that was like created for our company. at that location and the nutrition clinical manager. I got that role and I loved that as well. Like it was kind of the natural turning point. I'm not someone that wants to stay stagnant. I'm always learning and growing. And, that's something that once I become an expert in something, I'm like, okay, like what's next? Versus some people, which isn't a bad thing. Some people are like, they just kind of want to be an expert and they want to be comfortable. I'm just the type of personality where I always want to be learning and growing and always looking for the next thing of how can I do that? What's the next step in my life, my career? It's just that drive that I have. And I think that's one of my, the many reasons why I became an entrepreneur is because you're always learning. And I felt like that with eating disorders too, is you're always learning, you're always growing, you're never bored. So, anyways, I became a manager and I did that for 2 years. Loved it, challenged me in new ways, helped me learn in new ways. I loved my team. I had the best team ever. And it wasn't until, about a year into that when I learned about what I call the dark side of birth control and was introduced to the information about how birth control works, the negative side effects of it, negative consequences of being on it for a prolonged period of time, and that I wasn't actually getting a period on birth control. And I talk about this a lot, but here I was with a master's degree in nutrition, very educated, very educated in health specifically. And I had no clue what was happening in my body. So when I learned all this information, it was like opening up a whole new world. And I just went all in. I did so much research, so much learning, and made the personal decision to quit birth control. And for a couple months, it was fine. And then all hell broke loose. Horrible breakouts, anxiety that was sky high. I couldn't control lots of intrusive thoughts that were just like beyond. And my period was irregular. And throughout this process, I went to my doctor and I went to my dermatologist and I was seeking solutions. And really, all they had to say was just go back on birth control. And that wasn't an option. It was kind of like you just keep suffering and like just hopefully it fizzles out, or you go back on birth control, which is a big part of your story of what caused these things to happen. So birth control didn't fix my period. It didn't fix my acne. And it secretly made those things worse by depleting my good bacteria in my gut, my vitamins and minerals that are needed for hormone signaling and for healthy skin. And it secretly messed with my brain and my moods. And that was a huge defeating moment in my life. I would say that's like a rock bottom for me personally was when I left my dermatologist appointment and I had exhausted all my options pretty much besides Accutane and just go back on birth control. And I knew I didn't want to go on Accutane. But I also knew I didn't want to go on birth control. And she basically said, like, that's kind of like your only option. We've like done everything else that we know what to do. So I left and I was crying and I was like, I went through that wave of emotions. And I just remember once I got over the sad phase, I was then angry. And then I was like, okay, pull up my bootstraps and let's figure this out. Cause that's just my personality of like, okay, like, what am I going to do about this? If no one's going to help me, I'm going to figure it out. So it definitely helped that I have a background in nutrition. And so I just started digging into the research again. I did lots of education on functional nutrition, specifically related to birth control. So over the next couple of years, I struggled and basically experimented on myself to fix my skin, fix my mood and my period. And throughout that process, my understanding of women's health and all the gaps, it wasn't that I was just experiencing this. It was that so many other women I was working with or that I knew personally or professionally were also struggling with these same things. And that just showed that there was a huge gap in support and a lack of understanding, quite honestly, with women's health. It was always just, okay, well, you either are destined to suffer with whatever it is, acne, painful periods, missing periods, anxiety, mood stuff, or just go on birth control, which isn't actually solving the problem, which also makes it so that women are terrified to come off birth control. And it was at that point where I was actually in the process of with my friend who started, we started this job together way back several years ago. We were actually, looking into a private practice for eating disorders and opening our own business. And we did, and we had that as kind of a side gig for a while. And once I found a practitioner, it was called the Functional Practitioner Institute. And it was part business coaching, part, clinical education. And Robin Spangler created it. It's no longer in existence, but she created it and she specialized in acne. And that was my biggest symptom that was most distressing to me. So I decided to invest in that. And throughout that time, I just knew I needed to pivot. And so I ended up having a conversation with my friend. We amicably, decided to split our professional ties. We're still really good friends to this day. And I shifted into specifically working with women to help them have a proactive approach to stopping birth control and getting to the root of their hormone symptoms naturally. So they didn't have to feel chained to birth control their entire life or to suffer after they stopped. And I was really scared to go that specific. So without getting too, businessy here, because this isn't why you're listening to this podcast, but I started out kind of broad. I was like hormone dietitian and I can do some gut stuff and, I can help with acne and I can help with, bloating and constipation. And, I had that education. I have that ability to do that. But my passion was really in helping women safely transition off birth control because I knew this was such an issue and such a gap. And I knew that if I would have had that support, my experience would have been a completely different story than it was. And it would have been much, much better. I'm grateful that it wasn't because it made me make this pivot and again, just like everything else in my life, it helped me learn something. And it was rough going through it. So I made this decision to, switch my path, split with my business partner, and open my own business called Nourished by Taylor. At this point, I also knew that it was time for me to leave my full-time job. I could not devote the time to it being a part-time thing anymore. I knew in my gut at some point I had to pull the plug and I had to go all in. And that was really scary because again, I had a pretty cushy job. I had worked my way up. I worked really hard to get that position and I loved it. But I could just tell my passion for it had dwindled with this newfound information and this newfound passion of helping women safely transition off birth control. And I also saw that I just felt stifled by my ability to help people. I was doing meaningful work, right? Like helping people recover from an eating disorder is so important, so meaningful, such a need. So I was doing meaningful work. And at the same time, I felt like I kept seeing all of these women who were coming. I was still seeing clients and I was hearing about other clients that my clinicians were seeing that they were consulting with me on. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is such a need. Like left and right, women were being prescribed birth control for their acne. They were being prescribed it for their periods, like missing, because that's a huge thing with eating disorders. They are being prescribed it for their mood. And I'm like, this is making things worse. And they didn't have the whole story. But it wasn't within my scope of what I was doing, nor did I have the ability to properly like do the testing and that, in that position, that role or really dive deeper. I didn't want to just say like, oh, like this isn't like doing what you say it is, but like that's not why they're here to help their eating disorder. So while yes, I can drop little educational insights in there, that wasn't my role, and it really stifled me because I knew that so many women needed this information, and if only they knew that, they would just be so much more informed and could make better decisions. And going even further with the more recent information I've been learning about specific nutrients and vitamins and minerals and mental health, it just takes me back to those eating disorder days of like, oh my gosh, these people just, if we would have paid more attention to not just eating, which 100% is like first and foremost, just getting enough calories in, But some of these people aren't methylating, and some of these people are not, even all the therapy in the world and all the nutrition in the world, if they're really low in B vitamins and they're not methylating, then their anxiety is going to stay the same. So, you know, I didn't know that at the time, but just once I've gone through this recent round of education I've been looking at, it connected it back to that and how I felt at that time of just feeling like I couldn't make the impact I wanted in the space that I now was the most passionate about. So I decided that it was time for me to put my notice in and to leave and to jump fully into my own business. And I was by myself at this point, like myself in my own business. I had my own business because my friend and I had split professionally. And so that was really scary. And then I further niched down into, like I said, helping women proactively stop birth control. And that was scary because I was like, is anyone going to want this? Are people going to find me? Are people, I had started a whole new Instagram, and it's really hard to grow on Instagram, and it's there's a whole, it's a whole nother world than it used to be. But I knew that's what I wanted. And I knew just through talking with people and seeing it that it was something people needed, even if they didn't know it yet. So that is something that, that happened not last December. It's now August, but 2 Decembers ago was my last time working at a full-time job. And then that January I started fresh and was 100% in my business. And it's I'm saying this a lot today. It's a major learning experience, and I wouldn't trade it for the world though, because, the reason that I left that safety net was because I had this deep felt mission to help women heal their hormones without prescriptions, and to be educated and to gain that freedom, and to do it all with my eating disorder roots of no restrictive diets, no long list of fancy supplements unless we're doing smart supplementation, testing versus guessing, getting answers. And so whenever I have clients who send me messages, or I look at their check-in forms and I see that they are just feeling so much better, and I want to share a couple examples that just recently I had a client a couple weeks ago who messaged me and said she had gotten her period back for the first time since stopping birth control in 2 years. She got it back in 2 months after we started working together, because we did the deep dive assessment. I took a look at her nutrition, her lifestyle, her labs, and we figured out what was actually going on, versus she had been around the block with different doctors and they had done lots of testing and no one could tell her what was going on. And just everyone told her just go back on birth control, which isn't a real period to begin with. I had another client who shared with me that she was able to have a regular latte for the first time versus a milk alternative when she was on vacation. And previously, she had restricted dairy, gluten, sugar, caffeine, all these different foods for fear that it would make her break out, because she had no clue what was making her break out. So once we started working together, we deeply healed her gut, and we identified, okay, what foods are you sensitive to? She was and still is sensitive to gluten, so we have kept that, but she's able to drink milk and have a delicious whole milk latte on vacation now without her skin freaking out. And just her saying that, I was like, that is so freeing to be able to live your life without worrying about that. And then another client of mine said that she had the most unperiod. Actually, this was two clients. One client said she had the most unperiod period of her life, like in a good way. Like it didn't really impact her life at all that week she was having her period. Didn't really notice it. And then I had another client who recently stopped birth control, and she's like, I had the best period of my life. Previously had debilitating cramps, breakouts, lots of negative side effects when she had her period, and she had her period and it was basically, felt like it wasn't even there, which was really amazing for her. So I'm not just talking about these wins to showcase what I do. It's really to show you that this is possible. And there's proof in these wins that once you get answers with the right test, the right person looking at them, and the right plan, this method works. And that's why I switched to a root cause healing where we test versus guess. We look at the root causes behind your symptoms versus just masking them with something like birth control. And we do this through, of course, functional labs, but then also, a deep dive assessment with my higher level coaching programs, either the accelerator or VIP. We have a 75-minute assessment where we dive into, again, what does your eating habits look like? What is your lifestyle? What's your stress? What's your family history? When did you start having these symptoms? What was going on for you at that time? We dive really deep into all of that stuff. And then once I gather all that data from the assessment and the lab results, then you get a customized protocol that hits the nail on the head in terms of imbalances that were either masked or caused by birth control or always there to begin with, to heal those imbalances at the root versus just masking the symptoms further and secretly making them worse behind the scenes. This is no longer just a business to me. It's the more I work with women, and I worked with dozens at this point, the more I see this impact spreading and the more I feel like this is a movement. It's not just a business. It's not a means of me to live the life I want to live. It's truly going to get bigger and better, and it's going to help a lot more women, and it's going to be even better as the time passes. I mean, looking back over the past year and a half alone and seeing how many women are able to live their lives again and not have to dread their cycle, not have to constantly wake up and worry if they have new breakouts, not have to, feel anxious all the time and just be told just start an antidepressant. Like that's part of being a mom. All of those things make it so, so worth it. I share all this again to show you that this is possible for you. Even though it was a scary step for me, it's the best decision I made. And I hope this was helpful for you. And if this is something where you're interested in diving deeper, if this was kind of like the tipping point that you were looking for, of like, I'm kind of on the fence, or I don't know if my body is able to be fixed, or I don't know if, you know, I've tried so many things and they haven't worked, I would invite you just to book a free strategy call with me. I'll link the application below. It's really just for me to gather more information so we can have an honest and open conversation, no pressure conversation about your story and your history and what you have tried, what you're looking to gain, what your dreams are, right? Like, what would you like to feel when you wake up in the morning? How would you like to feel different? What would you like to improve? Because I'm 99% certain that it is possible. And I want you to have the opportunity to get someone who's, chatting through that with you, versus sometimes it's hard when it's just me saying this. But if you share some of those details with me and we hop on a call, I can give you specific feedback. Or I can be honest. I'm like, hey, like, I don't think I'm the best fit for you. I know someone else who would be a better fit, or here's some resources to check out instead. So, again, something to think about if you are really resonating and you feel like maybe you're broken. You're not. We just need to get to the root of what's actually going on and what those deeper imbalances are. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I hope this was really helpful. Please like, share, leave a review. It means so much to me. And until next time, stay nourished.